Welcome to the guide! Monk Inquisitor is all about slapping monsters with your bare hands and purging everything with circles of light. Be prepared, speed, flashiness and constant blinks can get you motion sickness in the end of the day. As you can guess, we are using Hollow Palm technique Keystone combined with the Consecrated Path and Inquisitor Ascendancy. This synergy allows us to neglect a lot of elemental elements and have insane clear speed for a melee build. Dexterity stacking is our main source of tank and damage, and I am certainly surprised by a rather low price of entry. You can start fully functional build on a budget of couple exalts, and with several more you can achieve great level of comfort and viability. All gameplay footage was recorded on build with investment of around 10 exalted orbs with only level 93 character. As pure elemental damage build, we will not do any elemental reflect maps anytime soon, and the porcupines are your mortal enemy number one. I have certainly died to them while leveling more times than I want to admit, and it definitely resulted in the rapid deterioration of my experience bar. Big boss encounters certainly do not forgive mistakes, and you need to know your moves. Elemental damage is not the best scaling mechanic when it comes to the Serious or Uber Elder, but if you are willing to pour insane amounts of currency into Dexterity stacking Amulet and Dexterity stacking Timeless Jewel, you can hit around 2k Dexterity and truly push this build as a dedicated endgame boss farmer. And of course, as you can get, we are rather limited on our slots when it comes to the gear, and we will need several unique items to stack our dexterity and damage both in the physical damage department and the elemental damage department. And first of them, of course, is Fractal Thoughts. This mask is rather a unique item that will increase your dexterity drastically by 15%, and we will have our strength, of course, higher than intelligence, and we will scale our elemental damage per 10 dexterity alongside our buffs from Hollow Palm technique. And of course, the prices for Fractal Thoughts is rather low, and you can find decent one for a couple dozen of Chaos Orbs. Of course, the second item, which is really important, is Garrokan Flight, and these boots are rather generic boots which have a bare minimum of your movement speed and other utility, but plus 2 maximum life per 10 dexterity is rather huge, and basically it will result in over 200 flight life if you have more than 1k dexterity, and the prices for this unique item as well is rather low in the challenge leagues. Another unique item which is staple in my opinion for this build is the Lion's Roar, and alongside all the utility that you can get from it, you will get the melee physical damage scaling that will scale your base physical damage that then you will convert into the elemental. And of course, the Ascendancy, last but not least. This is the insane attribute stacking item, and of course we will use intrinsic catalyst on it. Why the Ascendancy and not some dexterity stacking Amulet? Well, because it's not only simplifies your gearing process by adding you all the required intelligence, but it's also rather cheap. If you cannot find the perfect roll Ascendancy for a cheap price of around maybe 1 or 2 exalt, just buy several cheap ones and Divine Orb them, it will be cheaper. Alright, so we are starting building up our dexterity and of course stack our offenses and defenses from the unique items. Let's understand next what we will do with our main 6-link setup. Of course we are using Consecrated Path, and that skill will convert 50% of physical damage to fire damage, and we can benefit greatly if we convert all of our physical damage base to the elemental damage, and we will do that by using the physical to lightning support on our main 6-link setup. And that means that our physical to lightning support of course will convert the rest of our physical damage to lightning damage. This means that we will have 100% of our physical damage converted to the elemental, and this is rather huge since we can use 2 rather great supports. First of them is melee physical damage support, and the second one is elemental damage with attack support. To complement that, we will use pulverized support to increase our area of effect damage and scaling. And of course, we will use the gem swap for your map clear with increased area of effect, and with the consecrated effect for increased damage on your single target. Alright, so our main offense and defense tools are already established. And what we are doing with our passive tree, of course we will use some unique jewels. First of them is Brawn. We actually will be able to use a total of 3 of them in our tree thanks to our Ascendancy and increased intelligence. And of course we will stack our dexterity, and more dexterity means not only more life but more physical damage base. And of course, next one is the fluid motion. We will use only one next to the agnostic keystone, and we will convert our strength there to dexterity to gain a lot of flat dexterity on the spot. And of course, after that we will slot maximum of 3 grand spectrums in our tree, and it will increase our elemental damage drastically by 45% in each of the slots. And the last is the Thread of Hope. This unique jewel will actually allow us to allocate some rather great notables in the medium ring around, and more about that in the next chapter. But considering the prices of all these unique items, they are usually rather cheap, and even the Brawn that can be sometimes pricier is usually can be sniped for a couple of chaos, and Thread of Hope can be a bit pricier in the league start with the good elemental rolls. So here is our passive tree. If you are new to the Path of Exile, I am using Path of Building software. Links for that will be down in the description, as well as the link to build itself. So on our Inquisitor Ascendancy, we first go for our Sanctuary to have our Consecrated Ground buffs, and of course after that we are going for the Pious Path to have our Elemental Immunity and have increased attack and cast speed on the Consecrated Ground as well. After that we are going for our Elemental Damage and Elemental Resistances over here, and after that we are going for even more damage and the buffs when we used Spell and Attack recently. And of course, these Ascendancy choices are not viable because we will deal no critical strikes, since we have no way to have our critical strike base, and we will benefit 0 from any critical strike multipliers. And before I will explain the rest of the passive tree, if you are not yet subscribed, consider hitting those buttons down there, and of course it will help drastically for this build guide and any other build guide that I do to reach out for even more Path of Exile players out there. So if you have any questions, consider leaving them down below, and of course you can always reach out to me on Twitch when I'm streaming Path of Exile. And of course, here is our passive tree. We are starting as a Templar over here, and we're going down to the Hollow Palm technique straight up when you are leveling. So I am entering like Act 2 or 3 with the Hollow Palm technique and with the endgame skills. It is a rather great experience overall. So after that I am going for my life over here and slotting in this fluid motion over here next to the agnostic and converting all of the strength over here. After that I will go for my blood magic, passing by my elemental resistances down here. And the elemental resistances, if you see any elemental resistance in the passing by area, you grab them. Of course, we are going for the blood magic, and we will eliminate any mana management on our builds. And after that we are grabbing Mortal Conviction, so we can have one aura with no life reserved. And for our one aura we go over here for the Supreme Ego to buff it even further. And of course we are starting to get in our sockets for the Grand Spectrums, one over here, one over here, and the next one over here. After that we are going for our Dexterity stacking, grabbing our elemental resistances by passing by, and of course we going over here. Over here we are starting to allocate our Dexterity stacking over here, of course, with increased Dexterity from Utmost Swiftness, and we are starting to get our jewel sockets for bronze. So the bronze number 1 is over here, the next one is over here, and the last one is over there. And this slot actually can be used for the Thread of Hope, my apologies, not the Thread of Hope, for the split personality with dexterity and increased life, but general increases will be rather marginal, like several percents of life and several percents of damage. And in the first, when I was experimenting with this build, I actually went for the face acrobatics, and on paper it sounds really great, and in reality it was just awful. So I just went for the iron reflexes down here and converted all of my evasion to armor, and since then I had rather great experience in the game. So this is for this part of the tree, for our dexterity stacking, and as you can see I hit around 1.2k of dexterity, which is rather huge for the gear that I used. And of course, last but not least, we go in here for the call to arms. So we will use one war cry and it will be instant, rather great. Of course we allocated some life over here as well. And now we are going for the Thread of Hope. Of course, as you can see, we grabbing some elemental damage on the pass by, and we are grabbing more life and socketing our Thread of Hope with the medium ring, and this allows us with no travel time to allocate a lot of physical damage and elemental damage, and even more physical and elemental damage, and even more elemental damage, as you can guess. So yeah, the Thread of Hope is rather great. Yes, it will reduce your elemental resistances, but since we are combating that with our gear and each and single elemental resistance node that we can get, it will work in the end. And last but not least, here we are allocating our Sanctum of Thought to reduce critical strike damage on us and have some armor, of course, and reduce effect of curses, of course. And we will allocate by our anointment up there the Whispers of Doom, so we can use the dual curses. So this pretty much it for the trees, and with our passive tree established, we now need to consider our dual curse setup and some utility. Of course, we are using Whispers of Doom Anoint, and we complement that by using the Bane to trigger both curses that are linked to Bane. Of course, the Bane itself will do some chaos damage, but it is rather not important. The importance are the curses. The first of them are the Elemental Weakness, to reduce elemental resistances of the enemies, to basically increase our elemental damage from every source. And the punishment is a bit counterintuitive, but actually it works. Not every line will work on our build, but the cursed enemies grant more melee physical damage on melee hit is applying to our melee physical damage base that we are converting into the elemental. And of course the cursed enemies grant increased attack speed is also applies to us. Rather great and best in slot curse when you consider your second curse. And of course, last but not least is the Blood Rage. This spell is huge for these builds. It does not really apply on the bosses because it will only grant you increased attack speed, but on the map clear, the chance to gain Frenzy Charge on heal is huge. It will increase your clear speed drastically and will increase your damage as well. So the Blood Rage is rather great, and the rather important upside, it will actually trigger your Ascendancy, the spell used recently. And here is our last 4 gems. The first of them, of course, is our Hatred Aura, and we will scale it not only thanks to our Blood Magic, Mortal Conviction and Diagnostic. You can scale it by using level 21 gem, it is rather cheap, you need like 0 quality on that. And of course, you will gain some of your physical damage base as extra cold damage, and that means in the end your build will have all elemental damage in the world, so you will have your fire from the Consecrated Path, your lightning from physical to lightning support, and some cold damage from your Hatred Aura. So that's why we went for our Elemental Weakness curse in the first place. The next one is the Seismic Cry. Yeah, the wall of text, and we will use it in the insta-cast thanks to the keystone that we allocated on our passive tree, and the main points that you will exert next 4 melee slam attacks, and the Consecrated Path is the slam attack, of course, and we will increase area of effect of our Consecrated Path, and we will increase even more. And yes, we will gain some damage from it, but main quality of life feature is actually your increased clear area. And the next one is the dash, pretty mediocre travel skill, but because we are using second wind support, we will actually have double cooldown on the dash, and we will actually increase cooldown recovery not only for the dash but the Seismic Cry as well, thanks to that rather great support. Alright, so we are finished with our gems, jewels and passive tree. Let's understand and talk about gear. After that I of course will show my gear in the game, but here is the baseline for your gear choices. First, search for your bases. The first of them of course will be a Rustic Sash for implicit of increased global physical damage. The next one will for increased elemental damage are the opal rings. And the last but not least is your astral plate for its elemental resistances and rather great armor rolls. For the prefixes that you have total of 12 to choose from on your body armor, rings and belt, you will of course go for flat life on each of them. It will increase your life pool drastically. After that you can have 2 of them on the rings with the increased elemental damage with attack skills. You can have it both from the benchcraft, or you can invest some currency to have rather great natural rolls there. And of course after that you can craft the increased damage on the belts. And last but not least, on your astral plate you will search for physical damage from hit taken as any elemental damage source. In any case, it will be better than pure physical damage taken from hits. Just go for it, it is rather important. You are not overcapped on your physical damage, so this line is really great and strong, and you basically can go for it. And for other prefixes is to your own concern, you can go either damage or defense mods there. After that you of course consider your suffixes, and rather important, the suffixes is pretty mandatory, otherwise just nothing will work. Of course you will search for your flat dexterity and increased attributes. The increased attributes can be crafted on the astral plate and can be rolled on the rustic sash. The flat dexterity of course on your rings, and after that you will need to have 2 rolls of the chaos resistance to bear like hitting this 0% cap on your chaos resistance in the perfect world, but the elemental resistances is where it comes in the rather strict department. For the fire resistance I will go for tier 1 or tier 2 resistance to have your resistances overcapped even with the elemental weakness curse on you. And of course on the cold and lightning you are a bit more maneuvering there. You can go for tier 2 or tier 3 resistances there with the cold and lightning of course. So here we are with our gear, especially the one that I personally used on this build for the recording and whatever. So the first point is our astral plate. Over here as you can see I fit my tier 1 life roll, rather great one. Actually it was self-craft, so I just rolled for my physical damage from attack hits and just slammed some harvest stuff. For out of the harvest it will actually cost a bit of the currency, but not like deal breaker, it's rather mediocre chest to be fair. And of course the increased attributes is your benchcraft, which is rather cheap, and I just went away with tier 2. I not yet have the tier 1 and don't want to bother with some crafting services at all, because 1% is not a big deal breaker unfortunately. And the next shop is of course your rustic sash. Rather counterintuitive and rather cheap surprisingly, because we have physical damage implicit and increased elemental damage. It will usually chip you nothing. And of course this one is the hunter one, so you can have increased attributes over there. And as you can see I have attribute modifiers on the belt, the best modifiers for the quality of course, and the fire with the lightning resistance over there. And yes, of course, your life roll. The rings are rather straightforward, both of them are rather equal. The dexterity, of course, the dexterity and the quality modifiers for attributes, the best one. And the life rolls are rather obnoxious, not the best one, rather cheap one for the life. And of course your resistances, over here you fixing your chaos as well as some chaos on your armor. And of course 2 resistance rolls over there. Where I actually saved up a lot of currency, I went for the benchcraft of the elemental damage with attack skills. And if you go for the natural rolls, which are of course better, but they will cost you like 5 to 10 exalt easily. And if you go into the department of good life rolls, well, those one will be like several dozen of exalted orbs. So yeah, over there you will easily go for a lot of currency. But these rings like basically costed almost nothing, to be fair. And the gear, when you are just leveling up and not even dreaming about like your really expensive rings or maybe dexterity stacking amulet, of course you can go for the lore weave instead of your astral plate. This body armor is really great. Yeah, I was just surprised, like you can start this build, go for the red maps with the lore weave and with the bloody nomad. Seriously. Like lore weave and the bloody nomad is the pure minimum to run this build, and lore weave you can, first of all you can SSF craft it from the vendor recipe with the ring recipe, and second of all you can buy the cheapest one and just divine orbit until you have something like workable. It's really cheap and great and it works fine. And after that, like, alright, you ditched your lore weave, you ditched your nomad, you went for some upgrades. What you can actually upgrade? Over here the upgrade number 1, the socket duration gems. And as you can understand, the punishment, the bane, the elemental weakness, the blood rage, everything is duration gems. So over there you just hit straight up +2 levels on all of your helmet gems. Great and solid option. And of course after that, well, the Ascendancy will go. Because you can hit even more dexterity with the dexterity stacking amulet, but those will be not like several exalts. Those will cost you like not dozens of exalts. Those will cost you like 100 of exalts, 100 of essence crafted amulets, because you will need to go for dexterity. And dexterity over here, those essences, the max level essences, can get you a lot of dexterity on your amulet. And after that you will also need to fix your intelligence, because you will have no intelligence from your Ascendancy. And the alternative will be swapping up your bronze for the split personality. The increased dexterity and life over there, you will swap the 2 of your bronze for the split personality, and that's how you will neglect some intelligence requirement, but still you will need to get at least some intelligence on your gear, and it can be quite tricky and of course will drive up the overall prices of your build. So that's pretty much it for the main gear. The last but not least, the flasks. The flasks are really important, of course. Over here I have my panic flask, and of course with the panic flask I crafted my poison immunity once and for all. I have the poison immunity from the flasks, the chemist flask with the bleeding roll, and of course the chemist flask on the basalt allows you to have 2 uses on the full flask. The same for the chemist silver flask. Of course the onslaught is rather important for the clear speed, and of course this is the longest flask, so you can have anti-curse over there. And the Adziri flask, Adziri promise, rather great damage boost and chaos resistance roll. And of course the lion's roll, last but not least, it was the first thing that you equipped. And the thing that I want actually to mention, for the temple, for the Pantheon, the Lunaris is great option. The other option is actual anti-stun. Sometimes, especially when you're leveling, you will equip that one because you will be perma-stunned a lot. So while you're leveling and building up this life pool, you will actually go for the anti-stun with this particular temple, with this Pantheon, and after that you will switch for the Lunaris. Of course I need to upgrade the last one, lazy me. And of course the Shikari, overall rather great because, well, you have not really great life pool, so poison immunity and chaos damage reduction is rather great actually. And the alternative, of course, your Groot Hull, always great option to have instead of chaos damage reduction. So that's pretty much it for the build. Thank you for watching, I hope you enjoyed this build, and see you next time around. Foxy Shanks out.
Good find, Exile. More, Exile. Go find more.